September 21st, 2018. 250 people were told they had 30 minutes to leave. That's the story. Not a slow sunset, not a long public unraveling. 30 minutes. Pack your desk, hand in your badge. Healthcare days end right now. Thank you for your time. Telltale Games did not explode. It just stopped. In the middle of all the projects, in the middle of the conversation, in the middle of a season that wasn't finished, people were working on The Walking Dead, the final season, that morning. Some of them thought they'd be there for years. Some of them had moved across the country for that job. And by the afternoon, security was standing nearby while they put their things in boxes. No severance. That's the part people forget. When fans heard the news, it felt sudden. A tweet, a statement, corporate language about market conditions, about funding, about restructuring. These were all clean words, neutral words. Inside that building, though, it wasn't neutral. Access cards were shut off, Slack channels went dark, builds that were mid-development froze where they sat. The engine they'd been wrestling with for years was still running on monitors that would never boot up again for that company. A skeleton crew of about 25 people stayed behind to handle the contractual obligations. Everyone else was gone. You could argue that the signs were there, and most did argue that. Layoffs had already happened a year before. The studio had been expanding fast, chasing licenses, stacking projects on top of each other. DC, Marvel, HBO, Mojang, Gearbox, Netflix, all big names, big promises, episodic pipelines running side by side. But from the outside, they still looked alive. I think that's what makes this one different. There wasn't a public death spiral, no years of visible collapse. The brand still carried weight, and their name still meant something to players who remembered 2012, who remembered choosing between Lee and Clementine, who remembered thinking the studio had everything figured out. 6 years later, the same studio couldn't make payroll. The investment they were counting on fell through, and that's what employees were told. The board pulled the trigger. Immediately, majority closure. Immediate. There's something uniquely brutal about that word when you attach it to people's lives. Developers went home and opened Twitter because that's where the industry lives now. That's where the job leads move. That's where you quietly say, I was laid off today. That's where you find out you weren't alone. Meanwhile, players were refreshing storefronts wondering where episode 3 was. That disconnect mattered as well, because to most of the audience, Telltale was still mid-sentence. The final season of Walking Dead stalled after 2 episodes. It kind of just hung there. A narrative studio that built its entire identity on cliffhangers was suddenly the one leaving a story unfinished. Skybound would eventually step in. A portion of the original team would return under the contract to complete it, but that wasn't a revival. That was damage control at best, a rescue mission for a finale. By then, the original Telltale was already gone. The building still stood, the logo still existed, but the organism had shut down. No long goodbye, no slow fade. This was just a company that built its legacy on choice, reaching a point where there was none left. To understand how to get to a day like that, you have to rewind the clock, though. Not to the collapse or to the expansion years. You go back to when Telltale was small, when it was scrappy, when it was trying to survive on something nobody else believed could even work. So, Telltale Games was founded in 2004. Dan Connors, Kevin Bruner, Troy Molander. All 3 had worked at LucasArts. All 3 had watched that company cancel Sam and Max freelance release in 2004. It was a point-and-click adventure sequel that had already had a following, but it was shelved during some strange shift LucasArts was going through, and they were shifting away from traditional adventure games, something they had been known for beforehand. So the 3 left. San Rafael, California, small office, small team, a studio built around something the larger industry had already moved on from. They focused on adventure games. The adventure games were considered done by then. Retail space had shrunk, big publishers had pivoted towards action and shooters. The PC adventure scene was quiet. It was over. But Telltale built its foundation on the silence. The first release was Telltale's Texas Hold'em in February 2005, which was a small poker game. It existed to test their internal engine and keep revenue moving. It wasn't any sort of statement piece or anything like that. It just kind of kept the lights on. Later that year, they released Bone out of Bonneville in September 2005, based on Jeff Smith's comic series. It was a episodic adventure, digital distribution. That model kind of started there. In 2006 is kind of where the name began to carry a little weight, though. Sam and Max Save the World launched in October 2006, and Telltale secured the rights after LucasArts let them go. 6 episodes released across several months. That sort of episodic rhythm became their identity. Small installments, regular drops, cliffhangers, community speculation in between. They kept it moving though. It worked out. Sam and Max Beyond Time and Space followed in 2007. Strong Bed's cool game for attractive people arrived in 2008, a personal favorite of mine. It was based on Homestar Runner. WiiWare distribution, PC, digital storefronts were expanding, and Telltale absolutely leaned into that shift early. They licensed, they adapt, they survived. In 2009, there was Wallace and Gromit's Grand Adventures, which was another episodic structure, another external IP. The studio grew. The engine evolved slowly. It still carried the stiffness of early 2000s PC adventure design. They weren't chasing mainstream dominance. They didn't even begin to try that. They were carving out their own niche. And in 2010, Back to the Future the game, 2011, Jurassic Park the game. Now, something in particular in this list of games was the Jurassic Park games. It kind of marked a tonal shift. There was less traditional point and click like everything that you were used to and kind of LucasArts presentation, but there was more cinematic framing, more quick time events, more guided pacing, mechanics were narrowing, and presentation was widening. And you can see the transition in the Jurassic Park games. Around this time, leadership structure solidified. See, Dan Connors served as CEO, Kevin Bruner handled operations and business development, and the studio was expanding carefully, still independent and still license-driven. Then 2012, April 24th, 2012 to be exact. The Walking Dead Season 1, Episode 1, A New Day. Robert Kirkman's universe, Skybound partnership, a zombie property already embedded in television and comics. Mix that with Telltale's engine, their episodic model, their dialogue trees, and it all pointed at a wider audience. Lee Everett and Clementine. The design simplified further, inventory puzzles stepped back, and players' choice moved forward. Conversations carried weight. The timers pressured decisions. Episodes ended on unresolved emotional beats. By November 2012, the first full season was complete. It won Game of the Year, it sold millions of copies across all platforms, it expanded beyond the PC adventure niche and into console spaces that had long abandoned that format. Telltale went from survival studio to industry conversation in 1 calendar year. Staffing increased, ambition increased. The engine did not fundamentally change. In those early years, Telltale operated lean. They adapted known properties, they relied on small teams, they worked within limits. That kind of structure kept them alive when adventure games were considered commercially dead. By the time The Walking Dead landed, they were no longer small, they were visible, they were being studied. And when I say in 2012 the shift was immediate, it absolutely was immediate. The awards came in, sales numbers climbed, the industry press framed Telltale as the studio that brought narrative choice back to the center of gaming. It became single-handedly one of my favorite developers on the planet simply because of their narrative pushes, where most games did not give a damn about doing so. I loved them for it. Publishers noticed, hell, Hollywood noticed, investors noticed. Success changes the temperature inside the company, though. In 2013, The Walking Dead Season 2 entered into production. At the same time, The Wolf Among Us launched in October 2013, and it was based on Bill Willingham's Fable comic series from DC's Vertigo imprint. It was kind of a noir tone, fairy tale characters, another episodic rollout. 2 major narrative projects were moving at once, though. The following year, it expanded again. Game of Thrones released in 2014 under the license from HBO. Tales from the Borderlands launched in November 2014 under the license from Gearbox and 2K. Both were running episodically, both staffed internally, both requiring writers, designers, cinematic teams, QA, and engine support simultaneously, of course. The model was now operating in parallel. In 2015, Mojang partnered with Telltale for the Minecraft story mode. And that decision signals something completely different. Minecraft was a global phenomenon. Younger audiences, massive brand reach. Telltale now was trusted with one of the largest IPs in gaming history. Staff count increased, reports placed the studio above 200 employees during the peak years, production pipelines overlapped constantly, teams rotated between seasons, writers shifted from project to project. The engine remained proprietary. It had been built for early episodic adventure design. By mid-decade, staff were openly describing friction. Tools required workarounds, iteration cycles stretched, animations were limited by tech decisions made years earlier when the studio was a fraction of its size. Meanwhile, I should warn you all that licensing costs are very real and very costly. External IP agreements come with revenue splits, milestone requirements, delivery schedules. Delays compress the margins. Each episode required marketing coordination, certification, localization, platform integration. The studio was releasing multiple seasons per year. So in 2016, Batman the Telltale series launched in August, and this was a DC property built around player-defined versions of Bruce Wayne. Same structure as usual, dialogue trees, timed responses, branching paths that converged. By now the formula was visible. Everyone knew it, they knew it. Episodes ran for roughly 2 hours, major choices were presented with countdown timers, players received X will remember that notifications, end of episode statistics compared decisions globally, the emotional beats were effective and the technical structure remained rigid. Internally though, reports later described crunch cycles becoming normalized, deadlines overlap, teams move from one project directly into the next without extended downtime. Expansion required constant output. In 2017, restructuring officially began. In November 2017, Telltale laid off approximately 90 employees, which equates to around 25% of its workforce at the time. Leadership described it as some sort of reorientation towards fewer, higher quality projects. The phrase used publicly was restructuring, as many times they often are used that way. Kevin Bruner stepped down as CEO earlier in the year, March 2017. Pete Hawley, formerly from Zynga, the app company known for casino games, took over the company in September of 2017. By this point, the release slate included things like Guardians of the Galaxy, a Telltale series. This was going to happen in April 2017, and the continuation of Batman: The Enemy Within later that year. The studio was active across DC, Marvel, Mojang, AMC, HBO, and others, with a 5-year span written into each and every one of the contracts. From the outside, that slate kind of read as dominance. It looked like they were doing okay. But from the inside, it meant overlapping contracts, escalating payroll, and technology that required increasing manpower to maintain. Episodic gaps grew longer, and delays became commonplace in this company. Player enthusiasm softened, sales for later seasons did not replicate 2012's numbers, not by a long shot. The market adjusted, of course, and streaming platforms were rising. Interactive narrative was no longer novel, it was kind of stale. The structure that made Telltale visible required steady inflow. By 2018, that inflow depended on securing additional investments, and when that investment failed to materialize, the scale they had built could not shrink fast enough to survive it. But by 2018, Telltale was still announcing projects. They couldn't stop themselves. In June 2018, they revealed The Wolf Among Us 2, and it was scheduled for release in 2019. Teaser trailer, logo, Fable's returning, fans reacted immediately. That property still carried weight from 2013. At the same time, The Walking Dead: The Final Season began releasing in August 2018. Now, this was the closing chapter. Clementine was now grown, marketing leaned into finality, it was positioned as the end of an era. On paper, the studio looked active. Behind that, negotiations were happening. See, Telltale had raised funding before. In 2015, Lionsgate invested and partnered with the company and explored interactive television hybrids. Which sounds a lot like Silent Hill Ascension, but anyway, I digress. That experiment never really fully matured, and by 2017, Lionsgate had exited its stake. Capital tightened, revenue from earlier seasons had cooled, and the slate was still large. So, leadership pursued new financing in 2018. Employees were aware of discussions and where they were currently happening. See, studios that rely on external IP operate on way narrower margins than first-party developers. Cash flow timing matters here, and milestones matter as well. So when the final funding effort collapsed in September 2018, there was no reserve large enough to really absorb any of it. September 21st, 2018 was the majority closure. Roughly 250 employees were laid off in one single afternoon, and about 25 retained to finish contractual obligations tied to Minecraft story mode for Netflix. That project required delivery under an existing agreement. Other projects were canceled immediately. The Wolf Among Us 2 was halted, internal prototypes disappeared, ongoing development ceased. The public statement referenced insurmountable challenges. It referenced a majority studio closure. It did not mention the 30-minute window. It did not mention severance. In the days that followed, former employees filed a class action lawsuit citing violations of the WARN Act, which basically requires advance notice of a mass layoff under certain conditions. This was one of those conditions. Telltale argued that it qualified for an exception due to unforeseen business circumstances. Legal proceedings moved through bankruptcy court. Meanwhile, episodes 3 and 4 of The Walking Dead, the final season, were unfinished. Fans feared the story would never be completed at this point. In October 2018, Skybound Entertainment, founded by Robert Kirkman himself, announced it would work to complete the final season. Portions of the original development team were contracted back temporarily to finish the project. The final episodes released in January and March 2019 under Skybound supervision. That completion created closure for players, sure. It didn't revive the original company or anything like that. And then Telltale Games formally entered assignment for the benefit of creditors in November 2018. Assets were liquidated, licenses were evaluated, technology was assessed. The original corporate entity wound down operations. In August 2019, LCG Entertainment purchased the Telltale brand name and certain assets. They announced a revival under new ownership, with their new leadership and a smaller team. The brand returned, the structure did not at all. When people talk about the quiet death of Telltale, they often focus on the layoffs, the speed, the shock. Those details are very accurate, but the deeper part sits earlier. It was a studio built on episodic momentum, expanded into simultaneous production across multiple global licenses. It scaled headcount, it maintained a proprietary engine that required increasing internal workarounds. It depended on an external capital to maintain that scale. When one piece failed, the rest could not compensate. There was no public countdown, there was no visible collapse, no gradual audience withdrawal. There was a functioning company on Thursday, and on Friday the choices ran out, and this time there was no prompt asking you what to do next.